The deafening clap of thunder shook the ground as Kathleen Turner clutched her sodden shawl tighter around her shoulders, her eyes scanning the endless horizon of Kansas Prairie for any sign of shelter. The late May storm had descended with no warning, transforming the golden evening into a treacherous deluge in mere minutes. Her wagon wheel had snapped clean off when she'd tried to outrun the approaching wall of dark clouds, leaving her stranded miles from the nearest homestead. It was 1872, and at 22 years of age, Kathleen had never felt more alone. 3 weeks into her journey west from Philadelphia, she questioned every decision that had led her to this moment, standing drenched and terrified on the vast open plains with nothing but the fading light of day and the intensifying storm for company. "Steady, Maple," she soothed her nervous mare, who whinnied and stamped anxiously as another lightning bolt split the sky. The supplies in her wagon would be ruined if she couldn't find cover soon, and without those goods, her dreams of opening a millinery shop in Monticello, Kansas would be over before they began. A crack of thunder so fierce it seemed to split the air itself sent Maple rearing. Kathleen stumbled backward, landing hard in the mud as rain pelted her face. She was about to surrender to despair when she heard the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats approaching through the storm. Through sheets of rain, a figure on horseback materialized like an apparition. The rider drew closer, and Kathleen could make out a tall man astride a powerful black stallion. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, rivulets of water cascading from its edges. "Madam, are you hurt?" he called out, his voice carrying even over the howling wind. "My wagon," Kathleen gestured helplessly toward her broken transportation as she struggled to her feet, her once fine traveling dress now caked with mud. "The wheel broke, and I'm miles from town." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing himself to be a broad-shouldered man dressed in the practical garb of a cattleman. His face, now visible beneath the hat, was sun-bronzed and weathered, but his eyes were kind as they assessed her situation. "I'm Matthew Vance," he introduced himself, extending a hand to help her up. "My ranch is about a mile north of here. This storm's fixing to get worse before it gets better. We need to get you somewhere safe." Kathleen hesitated only briefly. The alternative was certain disaster. "Kathleen Turner," she replied, accepting his outstretched hand. His grip was firm yet gentle, and in that moment of connection, something inexplicable passed between them, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, though they were perfect strangers. Working with practiced efficiency, Matthew secured her belongings and calmed Maple, somehow managing to hitch the mare to his own horse. "We'll have to leave the wagon for now," he explained, "but I'll come back for it once the storm passes." Before Kathleen could protest, Matthew had lifted her onto his stallion and mounted behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back provided the first real comfort she'd felt since the storm began. His arms reached around her to take the reins, creating a protective circle that made her feel strangely secure despite the raging elements. "Hold tight," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear as they set off through the tempest. The journey was a blur of wind and rain, the prairie grasses bending violently in the gale as they traversed the landscape. Kathleen found herself leaning into Matthew's solid presence, grateful for the strength he offered without question. When a modest but sturdy ranch house finally came into view, its windows glowing with lantern light, Kathleen nearly wept with relief. A large barn stood nearby, and Matthew guided his horse directly to it, dismounting quickly to open the heavy doors. Once inside the shelter of the barn, Matthew helped Kathleen down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. The air between them seemed to change, becoming charged with something neither could name. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how close they stood in the dim light of the barn. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Matthew smiled, the gesture transforming his solemn features. "Nobody should face a prairie storm alone," he said, then added more softly, especially not someone who clearly doesn't belong out here. Kathleen straightened, pride momentarily overriding gratitude. I may not be familiar with prairie storms, Mr. Vance, but I assure you I'm perfectly capable of making my way in this territory. His smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. I meant no offense, Miss Turner. It's just that most folks around here know better than to be caught out when the sky turns that particular shade of green. He set about tending to the horses with efficient movements that spoke of years of experience, while Kathleen stood dripping and uncertain. There are some old clothes in that chest over there, Matthew nodded toward a wooden trunk. My sister's. She lived here for a spell before marrying and moving to Topeka. They might be a bit large, but they're dry. Grateful for the suggestion, Kathleen retrieved a simple calico dress that indeed hung loosely on her frame, but felt heavenly compared to her sodden garments. She emerged from behind a stack of hay bales to find Matthew had lit a lantern and was arranging some blankets on a clean patch of straw. We'll wait out the worst of it here, he explained. The house is close, but I'd rather not risk a lightning strike in the open, even for that short distance. As if to emphasize his point, thunder crashed overhead, making the barn timbers creak. Kathleen jumped involuntarily, and Matthew's hand found her shoulder in a reassuring gesture. It's just noise, he said gently. The barn's sturdy. Built it myself 5 years ago, and it's weathered worse than this. They sat side by side on the makeshift bed of blankets, listening to the rain hammer the roof. The initial awkwardness of their situation gradually gave way to conversation as Matthew inquired about her journey and her plans for Monticello, a millinery shop. He repeated when she explained her ambitions. Monticello could use something like that. Most women around here order their hats from Kansas City or make do with practical bonnets. Do you think there's a market for finer headwear? Kathleen asked, suddenly concerned. Matthew considered this. The town's growing. The railroads brought new folks with money to spend, and even ranch wives and farmers' daughters like a pretty hat now and again. He paused, studying her with newfound interest. You make these hats yourself? Kathleen nodded. I apprenticed with Philadelphia's finest milliner for 4 years. I've brought patterns, materials, even some finished pieces to start my shop. What made you choose Monticello? Matthew asked. It's hardly the first place people think of when heading west. Kathleen's expression clouded briefly. My father had a friend there, Mr. Hollister, the banker. He wrote to us often about opportunities in Kansas. When father died last winter, I found myself with a modest inheritance and no ties to Philadelphia. Mr. Hollister offered to help me establish myself in Monticello. I'm sorry about your father, Matthew said quietly. Thank you, she replied, the simple words carrying genuine gratitude. What about you? Have you always lived here? Matthew shook his head. I came from Missouri after the war, wanted open space and a fresh start. Worked cattle drives for a few years, saved every penny, then bought this land when nobody else wanted it. Pride crept into his voice. Now I run 200 head of cattle and have some of the best grazing land in the county. As the night deepened, and the storm showed no signs of abating, their conversation continued, revealing shared values and complementary differences. Matthew spoke of his love for the open prairie and the satisfaction of building something from nothing. Kathleen described her passion for creating beautiful things that brought joy to others, and her desire for independence in a world that rarely granted such freedom to women. The hours passed, punctuated by thunder and illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning through the barn's high windows. Eventually, exhaustion overcame them both. Kathleen found herself drifting to sleep, her head inadvertently coming to rest on Matthew's shoulder. She awoke to stillness. The storm had passed, and the first gray light of dawn filtered through the barn's wooden slats. Matthew was already up, tending to the horses. Morning, he greeted her, his voice soft in the dawn quiet. Storm's blown itself out. I've got coffee brewing at the house, and then I'll ride back for your wagon. Kathleen smoothed her borrowed dress self-consciously, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. "I've imposed on your kindness enough, Mr. Vance." "Matthew," he corrected gently, "and it's no imposition. My nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. Out here, we help each other, it's how we survive." The simple words carried profound truth, and Kathleen nodded her acceptance. They walked together to the modest ranch house, where Matthew efficiently prepared a breakfast of biscuits, bacon, and strong coffee. The domestic scene felt strangely comfortable, as if they'd shared many such mornings. After breakfast, true to his word, Matthew rode out to retrieve her wagon. Kathleen used the time alone to explore the small but well-built house. It was sparsely furnished, but meticulously maintained no small feat for a bachelor rancher. On a shelf by the fireplace, she noticed a single photograph in a wooden frame. A younger Matthew in a Union Army uniform, standing beside another soldier who bore a familial resemblance. When Matthew returned several hours later, he had not only her wagon in tow, but had already replaced the broken wheel with a spare he'd fashioned from his own supplies. "It'll get you to town," he explained, "but you should have the wheelwright check it properly once you're there." "I don't know how to thank you," Kathleen said, genuine emotion making her voice waver slightly. Matthew removed his hat, turning it in his hands in an uncharacteristically uncertain gesture. "Actually, I have a proposition for you, Miss Turner." Kathleen raised an eyebrow, instantly wary. Reading her expression, Matthew quickly continued, "Nothing improper, I assure you. It's just that I'm heading into Monticello tomorrow to sell some cattle. I'd be happy to escort you the rest of the way. The trails can be tricky, especially after a storm like that." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Kathleen's response. "That's very kind of you. And," Matthew added, his eyes meeting hers directly, "I'd be obliged if you'd allow me to call on you in town sometime, perhaps show you around the area." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. "I'd like that," Kathleen replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The journey to Monticello the following day revealed a landscape transformed by the storm's passing. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of grass swaying beneath the vast blue sky. Wildflowers had appeared overnight, as if the rain had conjured them from the earth itself, splashes of purple, yellow, and white dotting the green expanse. Matthew pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the region as they traveled, his deep knowledge of the land evident in every observation. He spoke of the season's rhythms, the wildlife that made the prairie their home, and the challenges and rewards of ranching in such territory. "It seems so empty to me," Kathleen admitted, scanning the horizon. "In Philadelphia, I was surrounded by buildings and people at every turn." "It's not empty," Matthew corrected gently. "It's full of life, just different from what you're used to. The prairie speaks a language of its own. You just need to learn to listen." Something in his words resonated with Kathleen. She found herself studying the landscape with new eyes, noticing the intricate patterns of grasses bending in the breeze, the darting movements of meadowlarks, the distant silhouettes of grazing antelope. As they approached Monticello, the town gradually took shape on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the main road, with the newly constructed railroad station marking its eastern edge. It was tiny compared to Philadelphia, but it had a frontier charm that appealed to Kathleen's sense of adventure. "Mr. Hollister said he's arranged rooms for me above the general store until I can establish my shop," she explained as they entered the town limits. Matthew nodded. "Abe Hollister's a good man. His wife Mabel will likely take you under her wing. She does that with newcomers, especially women on their own." They drew curious glances as they made their way down Monticello's main street, Matthew Vance being a known but somewhat solitary figure in the community, and Kathleen an obvious newcomer. He guided her wagon to the general store, where a portly man in an apron was sweeping the front porch. "Well, I'll be," the man exclaimed, setting aside his broom. "You must be Miss Turner. Mr. Hollister said to expect you yesterday. We were getting worried when you didn't show. Miss Turner had some trouble with her wagon during the storm, Matthew explained, dismounting to help Kathleen down from her seat. I found her stranded out near Cypress Creek. Lucky thing you did, the shopkeeper commented, eyeing them both with undisguised curiosity. I'm Harold Finch. My wife and I run the store. Your rooms are already upstairs. After introducing herself properly, Kathleen turned to Matthew, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye. Thank you again for everything, Mr. Vance. Matthew. I truly don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't come along. Matthew's usually stoic expression softened. I'm glad I was there. He replaced his hat, tipping it slightly. I'll call on you in a few days once you're settled. I meant what I said about showing you around. With that, he mounted his horse and rode off toward the cattle yards at the edge of town, leaving Kathleen to watch his retreating figure until Harold Finch's gentle cough reminded her of his presence. Let me show you to your rooms, Miss Turner, the shopkeeper offered. And my wife will want to meet you. She's been quite excited about having a real Philadelphia milliner in Monticello. The following days passed in a blur of activity as Kathleen established herself in the small Prairie town. Abraham Hollister, her father's old friend, proved true to his word, helping her secure a small storefront just 2 doors down from the general store. Mabel Finch, the shopkeeper's wife, indeed took Kathleen under her wing, introducing her to the town's leading ladies and organizing a small welcome gathering that doubled as an opportunity for Kathleen to showcase some of her hat designs. To Kathleen's surprise and delight, her millinery skills were received with enthusiasm. The women of Monticello and the surrounding farms and ranches had indeed been making do with practical bonnets or outdated styles ordered from male catalogs. The prospect of custom-made, fashionable hats created a buzz of excitement that translated into immediate orders. Throughout these busy days, Kathleen found her thoughts often turning to Matthew Vance. Their brief but intense shared experience during the storm had left an impression deeper than she cared to admit. Each time the shop door opened, she caught herself looking up expectantly, only to feel a small pang of disappointment when it wasn't him. A week after her arrival in Monticello, Kathleen was arranging her display window when a shadow fell across the glass. She turned to find Matthew standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Matthew," she exclaimed, unable to disguise her pleasure at seeing him. "Miss Turner," he greeted her formally, then relaxed slightly. "Kathleen, I see you've wasted no time making your mark on Monticello." The shop, though small, had been transformed in just a few days. Shelves displayed fabric samples and trimmings, while carefully positioned hats on wooden stands showcased Kathleen's craftsmanship. A comfortable settee invited customers to sit while consulting on their orders, and a work table near the back held the tools of her trade. "The response has been overwhelming," Kathleen admitted. "I've already taken orders for 15 custom pieces." Matthew smiled, that same transformative expression she remembered from the barn. "I'm not surprised. Folks around here appreciate quality and beauty, even if they don't always have much chance to indulge in it." He stepped further into the shop, looking slightly out of place among the feminine accessories, but nonetheless commanding in his presence. "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant tonight, to celebrate your successful start in Monticello." The invitation was delivered with such earnest directness that Kathleen found herself accepting without hesitation. "I'd be delighted." That evening marked the beginning of what would become a courtship conducted under the watchful eyes of Monticello's residents. Matthew would ride into town 2 or 3 times a week, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers gathered from the prairie, fresh honey from a neighbor's hives. Once even a beautiful piece of quartz he'd found while repairing fence lines. They dined together at the hotel restaurant, attended the town's summer social, and on Sundays after church, took long walks along the creek that ran behind the town. Matthew introduced Kathleen to trusted neighbors and helped her navigate the complex social hierarchy of the frontier community. As June turned to July and the Prairie summer intensified, Kathleen found her millinery business thriving beyond her expectations. Women from neighboring towns began making the journey to Monticello specifically to visit Turner's fine millinery. And Kathleen had to hire a local girl, Emma Whitfield, as an assistant to keep up with the demand. One particularly hot afternoon in late July, Matthew arrived at the shop just as Kathleen was closing for the day. "I have something to show you," he announced without preamble, his eyes alight with an excitement she rarely saw in his usually composed demeanor. "What is it?" she asked, intrigued by his enthusiasm. "It's a surprise. Can you ride? I've borrowed a gentle mare from the livery." Kathleen hesitated only briefly. "I can manage, though it's been years. Let me change into something more suitable first." She retreated to her rooms above the general store, exchanging her shop dress for a simpler skirt and blouse that would allow for riding. When she returned, Matthew was waiting with 2 horses, his black stallion and a docile-looking chestnut mare. They rode out of town, heading north, following the same trail that had brought Kathleen to Monticello nearly 2 months earlier. The July heat was oppressive, but a gentle breeze provided some relief as they traveled. Matthew led them off the main trail after about 3 miles, following what appeared to be a game path through taller grasses. "Where are we going?" Kathleen finally asked when curiosity overcame her. Matthew's answer was cryptic. "Somewhere special, somewhere few people ever see." The path gradually sloped upward until they crested a small rise, and suddenly the landscape opened before them in a way that took Kathleen's breath away. Below lay a hidden valley, lush with wildflowers in full bloom, a riot of color against the golden prairie grasses. A small, clear stream wound through its center, bordered by a handful of cottonwood trees offering blessed shade. "Oh, Matthew," Kathleen breathed, reining her horse to a stop beside his. "It's beautiful." "I found it my first year here," he explained, his voice soft with remembered discovery. "I was chasing a stray heifer and stumbled upon it by accident. I've never brought anyone else here before." The significance of this admission wasn't lost on Kathleen. They dismounted and led their horses down to the stream, where Matthew spread a blanket in the shade of the largest cottonwood. From his saddlebags, he produced a simple picnic bread, cheese, dried apples, and a jar of cool water. They ate in companionable silence, watching the play of sunlight through the cottonwood leaves and listening to the gentle gurgle of the stream. It was a moment of perfect tranquility, all the more precious for its rarity in the often harsh frontier life. "Why did you really come west, Kathleen?" Matthew asked suddenly, breaking the peaceful silence. The directness of the question caught her off guard, but something about this hidden valley seemed to invite honesty. "After my father died," she began slowly, "I realized I had been living the life he expected of me, not the one I truly wanted. In Philadelphia, I would have eventually married someone from my father's social circle, a lawyer or banker, perhaps, and disappeared into the role of wife and mother." She plucked a stem of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "I wanted more. I wanted to create something of my own, to stand on my own accomplishments rather than a husband's status." Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And Monticello offered that opportunity." "Yes," Kathleen agreed. "A place where I could be judged by my work and character rather than my family name or connections. Where I could build something from nothing like you did with your ranch." Matthew reached out, taking her hand in his weathered one. "And have you found what you were looking for?" Kathleen met his gaze directly. "I'm beginning to think I've found more than I ever expected." The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken feelings. Matthew leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Kathleen closed the distance between them, and their lips met in a kiss that felt simultaneously like a first discovery and a coming home. When they finally parted, Matthew kept her hand in his. "I've never met anyone like you, Kathleen Turner. You have a strength that has nothing to do with physical power, a determination that I admire more than I can say." His words touched something deep within her, a recognition of her own value that she had been seeking perhaps without fully realizing it. In that moment, beneath the cottonwood tree in a hidden valley of the Kansas Prairie, something fundamental shifted between them, a mutual recognition of possibility, of a future neither had anticipated but both could now envision. The ride back to town was filled with a new awareness, a current of connection that needed no words. As they approached Monticello in the golden light of late afternoon, Kathleen realized with sudden clarity that she had found not just a business opportunity in this frontier town, but perhaps the chance for a different kind of partnership, altogether one based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than social convention. Matthew helped her dismount outside her rooms, his hands lingering at her waist. "May I call on you tomorrow?" he asked, the formal question carrying deeper meaning now. "Yes," Kathleen replied simply. "I'd like that very much." As summer progressed, Matthew and Kathleen's courtship became the talk of Monticello. The successful rancher who had kept largely to himself for years and the refined Eastern milliner made an unexpected but somehow perfect pair. They attended the town's Independence Day celebration together, where Matthew surprised everyone, Kathleen included, by joining the dancing for the first time since he'd settled in the area. "I never had reason to dance before," he explained when she commented on it later, as they stood watching fireworks illuminate the prairie night sky. His arm encircled her waist in a public declaration of his intentions that did not go unnoticed by the townspeople. August brought sweltering heat that tested even the most seasoned Prairie residents. Kathleen's shop became uncomfortably warm despite the canvas awning she'd installed over the front window. On particularly hot afternoons, she would close early, sometimes accepting Matthew's invitations to ride out to his ranch where the house, built partially into the side of a low hill, stayed remarkably cool. It was during one such visit in mid-August that their relationship took another significant turn. Kathleen had been helping Matthew prepare a simple supper after they'd spent the afternoon by the small pond on his property, seeking relief from the heat. The domestic seen Kathleen kneading dough for biscuits, while Matthew tended to a rabbit stew, felt so natural that it startled her when she realized how easily she had slipped into it. As they ate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of orange and pink, Matthew turned to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Kathleen, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," he began, setting down his plate. "I know it hasn't been very long since you came to Monticello, and you're still establishing your business." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Kathleen waited, her heart suddenly beating faster. "The thing is," he continued, taking her hand, "I find myself thinking about you when you're not here. The ranch seems emptier somehow. I wake up looking forward to the days I'll ride into town to see you." Kathleen squeezed his hand encouragingly. "I feel the same way." This admission seemed to give Matthew courage. "I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures. What I offer is simple: my heart, my home, my promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings." His eyes, direct and honest, held hers. "Kathleen Turner, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The question, though not entirely unexpected given the progression of their relationship, still took Kathleen's breath away. In the silence that followed, she found herself considering not just the man before her, but the life he represented: a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. A chance to maintain her independence while sharing her life with someone who valued her strength rather than seeking to diminish it. "Yes," she answered finally, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. "Yes, Matthew, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he reached into his pocket, producing a small ring, a single pearl set in gold. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "She gave it to me before she passed, said to save it for when I found someone special." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Matthew drew her close, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a future neither could have imagined just months before. They agreed to marry in October, when the worst of the summer heat would have passed, and the autumn colors would paint the prairie in their finest hues. The news of their engagement spread through Monticello with the speed of prairie fire, generating an outpouring of goodwill that touched Kathleen deeply. Though she had been in the town barely 3 months, she had become an accepted and valued member of the community, something she realized had never truly happened during her years in Philadelphia, where her father's social standing had always defined her place. Mabel Finch immediately appointed herself wedding coordinator, organizing a quilting bee where the town's women created a wedding quilt for the couple while sharing advice and stories with the bride-to-be. Emma Whitfield, Kathleen's assistant, took on increasing responsibility at the millinery, allowing Kathleen time to prepare for the wedding and consider how her business might continue afterward. For this was one of the few points of tension in their engagement, the question of Kathleen's shop. She had worked too hard to establish it to simply abandon it, yet the ranch was a good hour's ride from town, making a daily commute impractical. "I've been thinking about this," Matthew said one evening in late August as they discussed the issue on the porch of his ranch house. "What if we build you a workroom here? You could create your designs at the ranch and travel into town perhaps twice a week to meet with customers and deliver finished pieces." The suggestion, so practical and supportive of her continued independence, confirmed for Kathleen that she had chosen wisely. "You wouldn't mind. Many men would expect their wives to give up such pursuits after marriage." Matthew shook his head firmly. "I didn't fall in love with you despite your determination and skill, Kathleen. I fell in love with you because of them. Your work brings you joy, and your joy brings me happiness. Why would I want to take that from either of us?" September brought the first hints of autumn to the prairie cooler mornings, the gradual turning of the grasses from green to gold, flocks of birds gathering for their southward journey. Kathleen divided her time between her shop in town and helping Matthew prepare the ranch house for her arrival. They converted a small room with excellent northern light into a millinery workroom, installing shelves for her supplies and a large table where she could cut patterns and assemble her creations. As their wedding day approached, however, nature reminded them of its capricious power on the Kansas prairie. The first week of October brought unusually heavy rains that swelled creeks and turned dirt roads to mud, making travel between the ranch and town increasingly difficult. "I'm worried about the wedding," Kathleen confessed to Mabel Finch as they watched rain lash against the shop windows. "If this keeps up, people from the outlying farms won't be able to attend." Mabel patted her hand reassuringly. "Prairie folk are resilient, dear. A little mud won't keep anyone from a celebration, especially not the first wedding we've had in Monticello in nearly a year." Despite Mabel's optimism, the rains continued unabated. 3 days before the wedding, Matthew rode into town looking grave, his horse splattered with mud to the haunches. "The situation's worse than I thought," he told Kathleen as they sought privacy in the back room of her shop. "Cypress Creek has overflowed its banks, the bridge is underwater, and the alternative route is nearly impassable." Kathleen's heart sank. The creek lay between town and the church, where they were to be married, a small but charming building built by the first settlers 5 years earlier. "We could postpone," she suggested, though the idea disappointed her deeply. Matthew considered this, then shook his head. "There's another option. The church may be out of reach, but we could have the ceremony at the ranch. The house isn't grand, but it's solid, and the barn could accommodate guests if needed. But how would everyone get there? You said yourself the roads are nearly impassable." A slow smile spread across Matthew's face. "The railroad." Kathleen blinked in confusion. "But the train doesn't stop anywhere near your ranch." No, Matthew agreed, but the tracks run within a half-mile of my northern pasture. I spoke with the station master on my way here. For a fee, he's willing to have the westbound train make a special stop. We could transport everyone by rail and then just have a short walk to the ranch. The creative solution was so perfectly suited to their predicament that Kathleen couldn't help but laugh. A wedding party delivered by train. It will certainly be memorable. With the new plan in place, the next 2 days passed in a flurry of rearranged preparations. Messages were dispatched to invited guests about the change of venue, and Matthew worked with several ranch hands to prepare the house and property for the celebration. Kathleen, meanwhile, put the finishing touches on her wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk, with delicate pearl beading that she had been working on in secret moments between her regular orders. The morning of October 10th dawned clear, as if the skies had exhausted their supply of rain just in time for the wedding. The air was crisp with autumn's promise, the prairie landscape washed clean by the recent deluge and glowing golden in the morning light. Kathleen dressed in her rooms above the general store, assisted by Mabel Finch and Emma Whitfield. Her wedding gown, with its fashionable bustle and modest train, transformed the practical milliner into an elegant bride. Emma arranged Kathleen's dark hair in a sophisticated updo, accented with small white flowers and a delicate veil of Kathleen's own design. "You look absolutely beautiful," Mabel declared, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Matthew Vance is a fortunate man indeed. At noon, the wedding party gathered at the railroad station, an unprecedented event that had drawn curious onlookers from throughout Monticello. The station master, resplendent in his official uniform, supervised as the westbound train made its scheduled stop, then continued a short distance beyond town before slowing to a halt at the agreed location. The wedding guests, nearly 50 in total, disembarked onto the prairie with much laughter and excitement at the unusual mode of transportation. From there, they followed a path marked with ribbons tied to stakes, leading across a gentle rise toward Matthew's ranch, which came into view as they crested the hill. The house and barn decorated with autumn flowers and golden prairie grasses arranged in artistic displays. Matthew waited for his bride on the porch, dressed in a new black suit ordered specially from Kansas City. His face, as he watched Kathleen approach on Abraham Hollister's arm, held such naked adoration that several of the women in attendance sighed audibly. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Justice of the Peace William Foster officiated, his weathered face solemn as he led the couple through their vows. Kathleen and Matthew had written their own promises to each other, words that spoke of partnership, respect, and a love born of genuine understanding rather than mere passion. "I take you as my partner in all things," Matthew vowed, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I promise to value your independence as much as your companionship, to support your dreams as fervently as my own, and to walk beside you, never ahead or behind, for all the days we are granted together." Kathleen's response, equally heartfelt, brought tears to many eyes among the gathered guests. "I promise to build a life with you founded on mutual respect and honest affection. I will be your steady companion through hardship and joy, your partner in creating a home that nurtures both of us, and your most faithful friend until my last breath." As Justice Foster pronounced them husband and wife, a sudden gust of wind swept across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of autumn and the promise of all the seasons to come. Matthew drew Kathleen into his arms for their first kiss as a married couple, and the guests erupted in cheers that seemed to echo across the endless horizon. The celebration that followed was one that would be talked about in Monticello for years to come. Tables had been set up in the barn, decorated with autumn leaves and candles that cast a warm glow over the proceedings. A feast prepared by the women of the community offered the best of prairie abundance: roasted venison and turkey, vegetables from late gardens, fresh baked breads, and pies made from preserved summer fruits. Musicians from town provided lively tunes as darkness fell, and the barn floor was cleared for dancing. Matthew and Kathleen led the first dance, moving together with a synchronicity that spoke of their natural compatibility. "Are you happy, Mrs. Vance?" Matthew murmured as they circled the floor. Her new name sent a thrill through Kathleen. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Though I may still be Kathleen Turner professionally," Matthew's laugh was rich with understanding. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As the evening progressed, and the celebration continued around them, the newlyweds occasionally exchanged glances filled with private meaning anticipation of the life they were beginning together. Appreciation for the journey that had brought them to this point, and the quiet certainty that they had found in each other precisely what they needed. The last guests departed well after midnight, transported back to town by wagons that could now navigate the drying roads. Matthew and Kathleen stood on the porch of what was now their shared home, watching as the lanterns of the departing vehicles gradually disappeared into the darkness. "Alone at last," Matthew said softly, drawing her into his arms. Kathleen rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "It was a perfect day." "The first of many," he promised, then swept her up in his arms to carry her across the threshold of their home. Their marriage began as it would continue with mutual respect, underpinning their growing love. The arrangement they had devised for Kathleen's millinery business proved successful beyond their expectations. Her workroom at the ranch allowed her to create designs without interruption, while her twice-weekly trips to town maintained her connection with customers and the community. Matthew, true to his word, supported her professional endeavors wholeheartedly, even building a glass-sided addition to her workroom when it became clear she needed more space and better light for her increasingly sophisticated designs. In turn, Kathleen embraced ranch life with determination and growing skill, learning to manage household matters in a way that complemented Matthew's work with the cattle. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the prairie in snow by mid-November. The days grew short, but the newlyweds found joy in the season's enforced intimacy. Evenings were spent before the fireplace, planning for the future while the wind howled outside their snug home. They spoke of improvements to the ranch, expansion of Kathleen's business, and with some hesitancy at first the possibility of children. "I would like a family," Matthew admitted one night as they sat wrapped in a quilt, watching the fires dance. "But only if you want the same." Kathleen considered this carefully. "I do want children," she said finally. "I just worry about balancing motherhood with my work." Matthew's arm tightened around her shoulders. "We'll find a way, just as we have with everything else. Our children will grow up knowing their mother is both a loving parent and a talented creator. What better example could they have?" Spring's arrival in 1873 brought renewal to the Prairie and significant news for the Vances. Kathleen's designs had caught the attention of a Kansas City department store buyer who offered to carry a selection of her hats in their ladies' apparel section. The opportunity meant expanded production and greater income, as well as the need to hire additional help. "I've been thinking," Kathleen told Matthew over breakfast one April morning. "Emma has shown real talent with the simpler designs. I could train her to take more responsibility, perhaps eventually manage the shop in town while I focus on creating new designs and fulfilling the Kansas City orders." Matthew nodded approvingly. "You've always had an eye for potential, in business and in people. Emma would thrive with more responsibility." As they discussed the practical aspects of this expansion, Kathleen felt a wave of gratitude for her husband's unwavering support. Many men of their time viewed their wives' interests as mere hobbies to be tolerated rather than businesses to be nurtured. But Matthew had never been such a man. That same spring brought the first of many challenges they would weather together. A late frost damaged the early grass, followed by an unseasonably dry period that threatened the summer grazing. Matthew worked tirelessly to ensure his cattle had adequate food and water, often returning to the house long after sunset, exhausted but determined. Kathleen supported him in every way possible, rising before dawn to prepare hearty meals, riding out to deliver lunch to him and his ranch hands in distant pastures, and offering both practical suggestions and emotional encouragement when setbacks occurred. Their partnership, founded in mutual respect, proved its worth many times over during that difficult season. By midsummer, the crisis had passed. Timely rains finally came, the grasslands recovered, and the cattle thrived once more. On the anniversary of the storm that had first brought them together, Matthew surprised Kathleen by taking her back to the hidden valley with its stream and cottonwood trees. There, beneath the same tree where they had shared their first kiss, he presented her with a small leather-bound journal. "What's this?" Kathleen asked, running her fingers over the soft cover. "Open it," Matthew encouraged. Inside, she found pages filled with Matthew's neat handwriting, dated entries beginning with the day they had met and continuing through their courtship, engagement, and first months of marriage. "You've been keeping a journal." Kathleen was astonished. Matthew had never mentioned such a habit. He shook his head, a hint of self-consciousness in his expression. "Not exactly. Just writing down moments I wanted to remember, things about you, about us." Kathleen turned the pages slowly, reading random entries with increasing emotion. May 24, 1872, found her in the storm today. Never seen anyone so determined despite being clearly terrified. Something about her eyes, like she's seen hardship before and decided not to let it defeat her. June 18, 1872. Took Kay to dinner at the hotel. She talked about colors and textures in a way I've never heard before, sees beauty in things most folks never notice. Beginning to understand why her hats are special. July 30, 1872. Showed her the valley today. When she looked at me after that kiss, I knew I would never want another woman for as long as I live. October 10, 1872. My wife. Still can't believe it. The way she looked walking toward me in that dress she made, like every good thing I never thought I deserved all at once. April 3, 1873. Watched Kay working late in her room tonight, completely lost in creating something beautiful. Realize I'm not just proud of her talent, I'm in awe of it. Tears welled in Kathleen's eyes as she read the most recent entry. May 24, 1873. 1 year since the storm brought her to me. Sometimes think it wasn't chance at all, but something more purposeful. Whatever brought us together, I thank God for it every day. She is the heart of our home, the center of my world. Matthew, she whispered, unable to find adequate words. He took her hand, his expression earnest. I'm not a man who finds it easy to speak of feelings, Kathleen, but I want you to know, need you to know how deeply you are loved. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the hidden valley, Kathleen felt a happiness so complete, it seemed almost too much for one heart to contain. This man, this life they were building together, was everything she had never known to hope for. I have something to tell you as well, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. Something I've suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be certain of before I said anything. Matthew's expression shifted to one of curious anticipation. We're going to have a baby, Kathleen announced, watching joy dawn across his face like sunrise over the prairie. Around Christmas, the doctor says. Matthew's reaction was everything she could have hoped for, pure delight mingled with tender concern. His hand moved instinctively to rest against her still flat stomach, as if already protecting the new life growing within. A baby, he repeated, wonder filling his voice. Our child. The months that followed were filled with preparations, both practical and emotional. Kathleen continued her millinery work, though at a somewhat reduced pace as her pregnancy progressed. With Emma now handling most of the day-to-day operations in town, Kathleen was able to focus on designing from home and fulfilling the Kansas City orders. Matthew, meanwhile, threw himself into preparing the ranch for their expanding family. He converted the small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, crafting a cradle from cottonwood with his own hands and installing a rocking chair by the window where Kathleen could nurse their child while watching the prairie seasons change. The community embraced the news of their coming child with characteristic warmth. Another quilting bee was organized, this time to create a baby blanket, and gifts of handmade clothing and toys appeared regularly. Mabel Finch appointed herself unofficial grandmother-to-be, offering advice, sometimes unasked for but always well-intentioned, and checking on Kathleen's well-being whenever she came to town. December arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Kathleen's due date approached, and Matthew arranged for Emma to stay at the ranch to assist with household matters while ensuring that Dr. Richardson, Montesilo's physician, knew to come at the first sign of labor. On the evening of December 20th, with a blizzard howling outside, Kathleen felt the first contractions. Matthew, who had been obsessively prepared for weeks, immediately sent a ranch hand on the strongest horse to fetch the doctor, while Emma heated water and gathered the supplies they had ready. The labor progressed too quickly for the doctor to arrive in time. With only Emma's inexperienced but steady assistance, Matthew helped deliver his own son just after midnight. The baby's lusty cry filled the room, a sound of such perfect new life that both parents wept with joy and relief. "He's beautiful," Matthew whispered, placing their swaddled infant in Kathleen's arms. "Perfect in every way." Exhausted but radiant, Kathleen gazed down at their child, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's determined chin. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names but made no final decision, wanting to meet their child first. Now, looking at the tiny face that somehow combined features of them both, Matthew suggested, "James, after my father, James Turner Vance." "James," Kathleen repeated, testing the name. The baby's eyes, unfocused but alert, seemed to respond to the sound. "Yes, I think it suits him perfectly." Dr. Richardson finally arrived 3 hours later, making his way through the blizzard at considerable personal risk. After examining both mother and child, he pronounced them remarkably healthy given the circumstances, and commended Matthew on his unexpected but effective midwifery. That Christmas was unlike any either of them had experienced before, quiet, intimate, centered entirely around the miracle of their new family. The storm that had raged during James's birth gave way to clear, cold days of brilliant sunshine that made the snow-covered prairie glitter like diamonds. Inside the ranch house, warmed by the constant fire and the deeper warmth of new parenthood, Kathleen and Matthew established the rhythms that would define their family life. As winter gradually yielded to spring in 1874, the Vance family adjusted to their new reality. Kathleen found that motherhood, while demanding, brought unexpected inspiration to her creative work. She designed an innovative line of practical yet fashionable women's hats specifically for mothers of young children, pieces that stayed securely in place during the constant bending and lifting that childcare required, while still offering style and dignity. The Mother's Collection, as she called it, proved immensely popular not just locally, but through her Kansas City connection as well. Orders increased to the point where Emma could no longer manage alone, and a second assistant was hired for the town shop. Matthew, meanwhile, approached fatherhood with the same thoughtful dedication he brought to everything he valued. He would carry James in a sling against his chest while checking fence lines or counting cattle, pointing out meadowlarks and explaining the different grasses as if the infant could understand every word. In the evenings, he would read aloud from books of poetry and natural history, determined that his son would grow up appreciating both the practical and beautiful aspects of life. Their partnership as parents mirrored the balanced relationship they had established as husband and wife. They shared responsibilities according to practicality rather than convention, with Matthew as comfortable changing diapers as Kathleen was handling household finances when her millinery business required her attention. As James grew from infant to toddler, his personality emerged a delightful blend of Kathleen's creativity and Matthew's steady determination. By his second birthday, he was a sturdy, curious child with an impressive vocabulary and a fearless approach to exploring the ranch under his parents' watchful eyes. The spring of 1875 brought another significant change to the Vance family. Kathleen's millinery business had expanded to the point where managing production between the ranch and town was becoming increasingly complicated. After much discussion, she and Matthew decided to build a proper workshop adjacent to their home, a light-filled space large enough to accommodate 2 additional assistants who would travel from town several days a week. This arrangement allowed Kathleen to oversee all aspects of the business while remaining close to James, now an active 2-year-old who delighted in helping his mother by carrying spools of thread and arranging feathers, with varying degrees of success. The business, now officially renamed Turner Vance Millinery, expanded its offerings to include not just hats but other accessories designed by Kathleen's scarves, muffs, and decorative hatpins that were shipped to stores in Kansas City, St. Louis, and even Chicago. That same spring also brought the news that they would be adding to their family once again. James would have a sibling by late autumn, a prospect that filled the little boy with excitement once the concept was explained to him in terms he could understand. "Baby in there?" he would ask, patting Kathleen's gradually swelling stomach with gentle hands. "When baby come out to play?" "Not for a few months yet," Kathleen would explain patiently. "The baby needs to grow strong first, just like you did." This pregnancy proved somewhat more difficult than her first. The summer heat was oppressive, and the demands of motherhood combined with her business responsibilities often left Kathleen exhausted. Matthew, observing her struggle to maintain her usual pace, insisted on hiring additional help not just for the millinery but for household matters as well. "You're trying to do too much," he told her one evening after finding her asleep at her work table, designs scattered around her. "The business can wait. Your health and our children come first." Recognizing the wisdom in his concern, Kathleen reluctantly scaled back her professional commitments during the latter months of her pregnancy. Emma took on greater responsibility for the day-to-day management of both shop and workshop, proving herself more than capable of maintaining the standards Kathleen had established. On November 12, 1875, after a labor that was mercifully shorter than her first, Kathleen gave birth to a daughter. Unlike her brother's dramatic blizzard arrival, Elizabeth Rose Vance entered the world on a clear, crisp autumn day with Dr. Richardson in attendance, and everything proceeding as it should. "She has your eyes," Matthew observed as he held his daughter for the first time, marveling at the alert gaze that already seemed to hold intelligence beyond her minutes of life. "And I think your spirit as well." James, initially uncertain about this small, noisy addition to the family, soon appointed himself her protector and constant companion. "My baby," he would declare proudly to visitors, standing beside Elizabeth's cradle with proprietorial care. The family settled into new rhythms as 1875 gave way to 1876. The nation celebrated its centennial, and even in remote Monticello, patriotic festivities marked the occasion. The Vances hosted a 4th of July gathering at the ranch, where neighbors and townspeople gathered for a day of food, music, and community beneath the vast Kansas sky. As twilight fell and informal fireworks began to illuminate the prairie darkness, Matthew found Kathleen standing slightly apart from the festivities, watching their children James now running with the older children while Elizabeth slept peacefully in a basket nearby. "Happy?" he asked simply, slipping an arm around her waist. Kathleen leaned into his embrace, her gaze taking in not just their children but the home they had built, the land they had nurtured, the community they had helped strengthen. "Beyond words," she answered truthfully. Matthew followed her gaze, understanding the breadth of her response. "When I found you in that storm 4 years ago, I never imagined all this. Nor did I," Kathleen admitted. "I came west, seeking independence, never thinking I would find a partnership that would make me more myself rather than less." Matthew turned her gently to face him, his expression serious in the gathering darkness. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you for a while now." Kathleen raised an eyebrow, curious at his tone. "Do you remember our wedding day? My vow to walk beside you, never ahead or behind?" She nodded, the memory still vivid. "There are times," he continued, "when I failed to keep that promise. Times when I've tried to make decisions for you, like insisting you reduce your work during your pregnancy with Elizabeth." Kathleen started to protest, but Matthew gently raised a hand to continue. "Let me finish. I've been thinking about this a great deal. While my concern was genuine, the way I expressed it wasn't in keeping with our partnership." His eyes held hers with earnest intensity. "I want you to know that I recognize this, and I'm committed to doing better, to truly walking beside you in all things, even when my instinct is to protect or direct." The admission, so honest and self-aware, touched Kathleen deeply. "We're both learning as we go," she said softly. "Neither of us had models for the kind of marriage we're building. There will be missteps along the way." A sudden burst of fireworks illuminated the sky above them, casting momentary daylight across the gathered community and their own small family. In that flash of brightness, Kathleen saw all they had created together, not just their children and home, but a way of being together that honored the fullness of who they each were, while creating something greater than they could have achieved alone. As darkness returned, Matthew drew her closer. "I love you, Kathleen Turner Vance," he said, his voice low and certain. "Every day in new ways." "And I love you," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as another burst of fireworks painted the prairie sky with ephemeral light. "Through all seasons, in all weather." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Vance family. The late 1870s saw periods of drought that tested even the most established ranchers. But Matthew's careful land management and diversification, adding crops and expanding into horse breeding, ensured their continued prosperity. Kathleen's business, meanwhile, weathered economic fluctuations by adapting to changing fashions while maintaining the quality and innovation that had built her reputation. James and Elizabeth grew into individuals as distinctive as they were complementary, James inheriting his father's affinity for the land and animals while developing his mother's eye for beauty. Elizabeth combining Kathleen's creativity with Matthew's steadfast determination. In 1879, the family welcomed another daughter, Clara May, completing their family circle. By the mid-1880s, as the frontier era began giving way to a more settled period in Kansas history, the Vance Ranch had become one of the most respected in the region. The original modest home had been expanded thoughtfully over the years to accommodate their growing family and Kathleen's thriving business. Yet it retained the warmth and character that had defined it from the beginning. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1887, Matthew surprised Kathleen with a journey back east, a month-long trip to Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, where they attended the theater, visited museums, and met with fashion houses interested in Kathleen's designs. It was her first return to the East since leaving 15 years earlier, and the experience was both nostalgic and affirming. "Does any part of you miss this life?" Matthew asked as they walked through Philadelphia's fashionable shopping district, where Kathleen's name was now recognized in certain circles thanks to her growing national reputation. Kathleen considered the question honestly before shaking her head. "I appreciate it differently now, but no, I don't miss it. Our home is on the prairie." The day before they were to return to Kansas, Matthew made one final stop in Philadelphia at the cemetery where Kathleen's father was buried. He stood respectfully aside as she placed flowers on the grave, watching as she knelt briefly in private communion with the parent who had never known her children or the life she had built. When she rejoined him, her eyes were clear and her expression peaceful. "Thank you for this," she said simply. "It feels right somehow to connect these two parts of my life before we go home." Home, the word held such richness, now encompassing not just a place but the people and work and community that filled it with meaning. The return journey westward was a homecoming in the truest sense. As their train crossed the Missouri River and entered Kansas territory, Kathleen felt an almost physical sense of rightness, of returning to where she truly belonged. The endless horizon of the prairie, so intimidating when she had first encountered it, now represented possibility and freedom in a way no city skyline ever could. Matthew seemed to sense her thoughts, reaching across to take her hand as familiar landmarks began to appear outside the train window. "Almost home," he said quietly. When they finally arrived at the Monticello station, they were met by their children, James, now 15, and nearly as tall as his father, Elizabeth at 12 already showing signs of the beauty she would become, and 8-year-old Clara bouncing with excitement at her parents' return. The family reunion on the platform drew smiles from other passengers and the station staff, who had watched the Vance children grow from babies to the capable young people they were becoming. The ride back to the ranch, as the sun began to set, brought a sense of completion to their journey. The October prairie was ablaze with autumn colors, the grasses turned to gold and bronze, stands of trees flaming with red and orange leaves, the vast sky painted in shades of pink and purple as day yielded to evening. As they crested the final rise that would bring their home into view, a sudden strong wind swept across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of earth and grass and the promise of approaching winter. The children, riding ahead in their eagerness to be home, had already disappeared over the hill. Matthew reined his horse to a stop beside Kathleen's, turning to look at her in the fading light. The years had touched them, both silver threading through his dark hair, fine lines around her eyes that deepened when she smiled, but the essence of who they were, together and individually, remained unchanged. 15 years ago, I found you in a storm, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening stillness. I couldn't have imagined then all that would follow. Kathleen smiled, the expression lighting her face with the same inner radiance that had first captured his heart. Nor could I have imagined finding everything I never knew I was searching for in a place I never planned to be. The wind gusted again, stronger this time, bringing with it the first hint of rain, not a destructive storm like the one that had brought them together, but the gentle autumn showers that would nourish the land through the coming spring. Above them, the vast prairie sky darkened with approaching clouds, punctuated by the last brilliant rays of the setting sun. Matthew reached across the space between their horses, taking Kathleen's hand in his. We should get home before the rain starts, he said, but neither of them moved just yet, held in this moment of reflection between past and future. Around them, the prairie grasses bent and swayed in the strengthening wind, creating waves across the landscape like a golden sea. In the distance, the lights of their ranch house beckoned, promising warmth and shelter from the approaching weather. Matthew's gaze held Kathleen's, decades of shared life reflected in his eyes. I said it 15 years ago, he murmured, his voice carrying on the wind, and it's even more true today. As the first raindrops began to fall, he drew her closer, leaning from his saddle to embrace her. Against the backdrop of the darkening prairie sky and the coming storm, the cowboy held her and whispered, "You are home." And she was.